Um, Welcome to the April 22nd, 2021 electronic meeting of the Environmental Commission. This meeting is in accordance with executive orders from the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, there are two, one after the presentation and one at the end of the regular business of this meeting. So if you want to speak during either of these public comment opportunities, please call 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099. These are both toll-free numbers, and enter meeting ID number 997-3412-6347. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN Channel 16, AT&T Channel 9, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. So I call this meeting to order. It is 7:05 p.m. Josh, would you read the land heritage statement?
Sure. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Adawa, Ojibwa, and Potawatomi, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained generally in unconscionable ways from indigenous people. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Would you do the roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Graham? Commissioner Needham?
I was here,
Oh, okay, great.
and it is on Lake Superior.
Perfect.
Split Rock Lighthouse,
Okay.
about halfway up the Arrowhead.
Commissioner Needham? Yeah. Councilmember Dish?
Yes.
All right. Commissioner Gibrandel?
Here from Ann Arbor.
Okay, Councilmember Griswold?
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Kellawart?
Here.
Chair Brown?
Present in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Overpeck?
Here, and I am in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Mirsky?
Here and in Ann Arbor.
Co-Chair Mitchell?
Here in Ann Arbor.
Let's see, Commissioner Buendia?
Here from Ann Arbor.
And Commissioner Ferris. All right, I think you have quorum.
All right, thank you, Josh. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as written? I can't see anybody's hand.
So move, John.
There are a lot raised.
Oh, okay.
I have a comment or a question, I guess, for you, Steve, council members, and maybe staff. You mentioned, I think we talked about this at the end of the last meeting, public comment we have put at the end of the presentation. I thought the convention was that public comment was always at the beginning of the meeting, so people don't have to stay on the phone for 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, depending on how long the first presentation goes. Am I mistaken with that? And if not, could we move then public comment to the beginning of this and subsequent meetings?
So I hear a motion by John Mirsky. Do I hear a second?
Yes.
Rita? Okay.
Yes. I second.
Okay, so the floor is open for discussion. Raise your hand if you'd like to be recognized. Yeah, I can't see anybody.
I see no hands raised, but I'll comment that I think this is a good idea for the flow of our meetings and for public participation.
Okay, so all who say aye, raise your hand or say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? Looks like it passes unanimously, John.
Good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
So I guess maybe I should have, I guess this would constitute changing the public commentary now to right before the presentations, which is the next item on the agenda. All right, so I'll initiate public commentary then now, and then I will mention it later. So public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247. This information and enter meeting ID number 997-3412-6347. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automatic announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sound so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And be patient, there is a delay of up to 30 seconds before connection is established. So Josh, is anybody on the line yet?
I don't see anyone as of now. We can give it a minute and see if anyone joins us. No, I'm not seeing anyone.
Okay, let's wait another few seconds. Okay, not hearing anybody. This is the end of the first public comment period. There will be another public comment period at the end of the meeting. So the next item on the agenda are special presentations. So I'm going to give up the chair to Vice Chair Rita Mitchell, and she's going to manage the special presentations, and I will take the chair back for the next item on the agenda, which is approval of minutes. Okay, Rita, would you like to proceed?
Yep. Thank you, Steve. First off, I want to say Happy Earth Day, everyone. I am really pleased to have Earth Day as an opportunity to bring in information about the Pollinator Subcommittee that's been working to do outreach for what we are calling our pollinator allies in the community. And it's been really gratifying to see the involvement of many groups. And we found some people who are willing to share their expertise and observations for this part of the meeting prior to something that we'll be considering later. So our mission, just to repeat something that we've said to the group before, for the Pollinator Subcommittee is to foster a culture of acceptance and appreciation of pollinators in order to preserve and strengthen pollinator populations in Ann Arbor. And we hope to do that through how we advise through the commission as a whole, and how we help to work with others to educate members of the community. And we're really fortunate to have 3 really great presenters tonight. Our first one is Mark Charles. whom I've come to know through the group called Wild Ones. He's been involved for over 20 years in the Ann Arbor Natural Areas Preservation group as a volunteer. He ran a nationwide program for youth-led habitat projects, and he organized the first public pollinator education event in 2009 in Ann Arbor. Hey, Mark. And he's still, and I can say from many conversations with him, he's still appreciating local ecosystems and learning how to support them. I think that is a really great way to start us off. And Mark, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We have things set up so that you can share your screen and your presentation, and I'll just turn it over to you right now. Thank you. The mute.
Got it. Sorry. Thank you, Rita and Commission. I feel very privileged to be able to speak to you. I'm Mark Charles. I live at 2326 Easy Street in Ann Arbor, and that's where I'm speaking from today. Start my slides if I can manage that. Okay. Why are we interested? Well, I guess first a couple more things about me. I got involved with native plants in the first place, which preceded my interest in native pollinators. And that happened through my daughter, who was in an after-school program with our neighbor, Janine Palms. And as a part of that, they had adopted a stream, and they ended up with adult support creating rain gardens in Ann Arbor's Boer Park. And I know some of you have been hands-on participants in that process. From there I got to learn about native plants, found it pretty interesting. And as I learned about native plants, I learned that a great majority of our interesting native plants, certainly those that have showy flowers, all depend on pollinators for their existence. The fact is very simple. If there are no pollinators, there can be no fertile seeds for these large groups of plants. And with no fertile seeds, eventually the current individuals will die out and the species will go extinct. The more we learn about pollinators, the more we see how they are important to multiple environmental goals. And that leads me to increase my efforts for supporting cultural and landscape practices that are healthy for pollinators, primarily bees, especially native bees, certain other native insects, primarily native insects that we consider beneficial to humans, but also beneficial to the whole functioning of ecosystems, which, as we continue to learn, is a more and more complex than we had imagined. And each time we think we've got a bit of a full understanding, we've learned soon after that no, there's another magnitude beyond that we don't understand. The tiny things that run the world, as E.O. Wilson says. This happens to be a serviceberry in my backyard. One of the big reasons for supporting pollinators is simply that they're interesting. They're beautiful, they are complex, their relationship with flowers and plants are complex, and if people are free of taught, if they have not learned fear and not learned that every insect is something to be destroyed, they're capable of just seeing them on their own. The photo on the right is from our first pollinator education event that Rita mentioned, 2009, co-sponsored by Burr Park Children's Wet Meadow, Ann Arbor Chapter of Wild Ones, and Ann Arbor City Natural Area Preservation. photo on the left is from my front yard, and this is a native bee, kind of a small thing, on coneflower, Echinacea purpurea. Now, supporting pollinators is supporting a number of other goals that I know are important to you all. One of them is they support home gardens and local food production. Certainly a matter of interest to us all. They support native plants in the broad way, as I've already mentioned, and native plants are the fundamental, along with soil quality, native plants are the fundamental participants in the ecosystem. They're important for a lot of reasons, but in direct functional terms, environmental services, you might try to call it, they absorb stormwater, they need less supplemental watering than most cultivated plants. They require less of the kind of mowing and tending that we tend to rely on gasoline-powered tools. Therefore, they call for less emissions. And finally, they tend to be more resilient in the face of climate change and extreme weather events. Now, we've just experienced one of those in the past 24 hours, and it'll be real interesting to see in the next 3 or 4 days how many dead tulips you notice in your yard and what change you notice, if any, if you're growing native plants. It's important to know that as more and more people learn about the value of native plants and native pollinators, more and more organizations are implementing programs that encourage their members and the broader public to support these organisms. Wild Ones is a national organization with a chapter in Ann Arbor since, I don't know, sometime in the late 1990s. Southeast Michigan Butterfly Association is focused on butterflies. Master Rain Gardens is an organization we'll hear from in a few minutes. Broad environment groups like Sierra Club, Audubon, the Nature Conservancy, various land preserve organizations. There's just a great deal of increasing interest, increasing support. Learning is happening, and the word is going around. There's lately a Facebook group called Pollinators and Native Plants, and it has recently passed the milestone of 20,000 members. A number of the things that the city does certainly impact, almost everything the city does impacts pollinators, but there are certain things the city does already that are very actively benefiting pollinators. So I'm pleased to say there's a lot of good news here. Habitat preservation includes active support for rain gardens, a wonderful system of natural areas, our system of green belts and green preservation both within and outside the city, protection of variegated stream banks and vegetated stream banks that have something other than turf grass. I think your plan changes to Chapter 40 also fall in this category. In terms of cultural practices, certainly integrated pest management, which I know the Commission has supported, control of invasive species, not only invasive plants, but invasive insects and other organisms, the increased use of native plants in all possible places. That includes city streets and street extensions, street medians. It includes the city's own property. It includes private corporations and homeowners. Very broadly, the support of native plants helps make our city more sustainable, more resilient, and a happier place to live in. Finally, the efforts to train staff and promote training broadly through the entire city staff. Very, very helpful. And the gradual addition of appropriate requirements to city contracts from everything from mowing, tree maintenance, other things, certainly will continue to benefit pollinators and the ecosystem. There's a number of things the city has experimented with, and there's certainly been a learning process. It's certainly a good idea and probably a good year, a good time period for us to think about what has worked, some things that haven't worked so well, some things that have worked that we can expand on success. And the kind of initiatives that I think we have a start and can really go forward with include the ones listed here on the right. I'll just mention in terms of the photograph that this was actually a joint city-county effort in Mary Beth Doyle Park and on the banks of Mallett's Creek, which, as you know, Mallett's Creek flows and drains through a great part of the east side of Ann Arbor. This involved third graders planting native shrubs with support from NAP volunteers and city staff and staff from the Washington County Water Resource Commissioner's Office. Also a volunteer took the photographs, volunteer associated with that office. And of course they had releases, signed privacy releases from parents of all the juveniles. Why is this not going down? I'm sorry, I've got a minor technical glitch here. There we go. That ends my presentation. The contact information for the Wild Ones chapter, which does monthly programs by Zoom these days, and hopefully with vaccination we'll be going back to doing them at the Mathai Botanical Gardens. The photograph here is willows, which is a native species very valuable to pollinators, even though it's not pollinated by insects. And this is part of a stream bed project at the Mary Lou Murray Recreation Center here in Ann Arbor. Thank you again.
Unmuted. Thanks, Mark. That was great. I just wanted to ask one thing that you and I had commented on before, and just to have you comment on the specifically the coneflower that had holes in the petals, and what you see as the significance of that, that would be good for people in the community to understand.
Oh, see if I can get that slide back here. For some reason, here we are. Okay, what Rita is talking about is here in the purple coneflower image on the right. You can see, in this case, you have a pair of semicircular cuts in the leaf petals. Just happens that they're a pair that are opposite each other, and you can see another one here at the, sort of the 3 o'clock position, and maybe you can see one over here at about 4 o'clock. There are certain native insects, native bees, that provision their nests with pollen. They lay the eggs, and then they seal up the nests, and certain of them, generically called leafcutter bees, cut with their mandibles semicircular pieces of flower petals or certain leaves, and use those to to seal the opening of the tunnels in which they have laid their, provisioned with pollen and laid their eggs for their young.
And I guess my reason for for really appreciating that is that for me, it's an indicator that when we see holes in leaves and petals, that's actually very often a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a necessary thing. If we have a world with no insect damage to plants, it means we have no insects that are eating, and that means we will have no insects. And as I mentioned before, if we have no insects, we will have no flowering plants.
And possibly no food.
Yes. In the past, our people 10 and 20 years ago, very few people had this understanding. So I can remember when there was an outbreak of gypsy moth and gypsy moth larvae, and people were panicking that it's going to kill all the trees, and so must be stopped at any cost. Well, any cost turns out to be an enormous cost, because the things that were sprayed, even with people opting out and balloons and all of the discussion around those issues, those sprays killed desirable insects right along with gypsy moths. They killed monarch butterflies, every other sort of butterfly. They killed dragonflies, native bees, you name it. So while they did succeed in knocking down the gypsy moths, they killed a lot of other desirable things and really damaged the ecosystem. I think a better approach to invasive plant management is what we've seen with purple loosestrife. And the people at that university down the road that with considerable effort and care found an insect from the plant's native habitat that could survive here and that would not spread. They had, the biggest part was guaranteeing it wouldn't do any unwanted damage and spread to damage other plants. They did that research. It took time and money, of course, and introduced the insect. And at this point, purple loosestrife, which was formerly a very bad pest in any kind of wet areas and a lot of roadside ditches and so on, is really not a problem. It survives in small populations, but it doesn't get out of hand.
Pretty impressive. I see three other people who would like to ask you a question, Mark. So I'm going to start with John Mirsky.
Okay.
I see your hand, John.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for all the work that you've done in this area. At the end of your presentation, you listed a number of actions we can take, and I'm wondering if there's one to add to it, and if people on this meeting who have more expertise than I can comment. I've heard that it would be much better for insects, I don't know specifically about pollinators, but I assume also pollinators, if property owners would delay the cleanup on their property until the early part of May, because if they're going around and raking up and sucking leaves and everything like that, then there's a lot of insect larvae that are either going to be damaged or killed or sucked up and carted off and composted or whatever happens. Is that indeed true? And is there something we can do to better inform not only residents, but in a town like Ann Arbor, where a lot of landscaping and lawn care companies do that kind of work, get the word out to them?
Yes, thank you for bringing this up. Let me click the right buttons here. It just so happens that the document that's shown on the screen here from the Xerces Society speaks to that very point. And I'd be glad to send you a copy of that, where you can find it and download it from the internet. And those practices that you mentioned are right on target, and they can be done at all levels. They can be done by homeowners, they can be done by landscape and landscape contractors. They can be done by city staff on city property. A lot of cultural practices are widely applicable and require widespread education, specific training, and in some cases enforcement through the city contractual process.
Thank you. And it would be,
Steve?
you could provide
Sorry.
that copy of that, and we can distribute it amongst the entire commission. Thank you.
Sure.
Steve, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. Yeah, thank you very much, Mark, for that presentation. I had a question about, you said that some native trees were supportive of pollinators. Which ones are in particular stand out besides willows that you mentioned?
Oh, thanks for that question. I'm sure you know that a great many of our shade trees, especially, are wind pollinated, and of course all evergreens, all pines and spruces and so on are wind pollinated. But even among those, one genus in particular is very helpful to pollinators, and that's willows. So any kind of willows, whether it's pussy willows, weeping willows, native or non-native, are vital because they provide pollen that early bees can use, and they're especially important in the very early spring because a number of bee species emerge, in fact, 2 or 3 weeks ago now, and are hungry and need food for fuel, and they can get that from willows. And I've had I'm sorry. I had an illustration on the last page of my presentation was showing a native bee generically called a cellophane bee, Coletes genus, on a willow. Other trees include some that the city is currently planting and some that perhaps could be included. Liriodendron, the tulip tree, very beneficial. Something called the Kentucky coffee tree. Doesn't really make coffee, but it's called that. Gymnocladus is the genus there. Tulip tree is Liriodendron. Also, everything in the genus Prunus, that includes wild black cherries, wild plums. So those are trees that are commonly used in landscaping and that are beneficial to insects. The other thing that's beneficial to insects is native shrubs, native woody shrubs, for the same reasons.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
See another hand, Chris Graham.
Here I am, still working on dinner. I apologize. Wild ones have been a force in our community among those who care about natural features for a long time. I regret I don't have time to participate in more organizations than I do and do more than I do, or I would be there. A couple of interesting observations over the last couple of days. Redbuds, hawthorns. Our native plants survived the cold of 2 nights ago and last night just fine. Some of you may have noticed magnolias around town that were extraordinarily beautiful this year because we had a southern spring where most of the magnolias come from.
Great while it lasted.
Yeah, that we plant in our landscape, and they were completely crushed night before last. Just more crushed than I've ever seen them at the same year that they were the most beautiful that they have ever been. So native plants are really important, and I'm sure you agree, and the wild ones all agree. And I'm not sure I'm willing to go to the place where we don't plant anything but native plants, but at least we should do a lot more of that, and I'm sure you agree.
Yes, indeed. We could spend an evening on this, but and we'd probably end up agreeing to disagree. But I would assert that any landscaping need, any landscape design need, can be met with the appropriate native plant.
I saw Gabby raise her hand. Gabby Buendia.
That's throwing down the gauntlet.
Do not disagree. But a lot of clients would say, oh, but I need a magnolia.
Yeah, you need one, yeah.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for your presentation. I also wanted to thank you for sharing how you got involved with this and sharing your personal story on it, which leads me to ask, in terms of education and awareness, you got involved with this because of your daughter. What do you think would be impactful ways to get more families involved?
Oh, wonderful question. Number one, keep doing the things that the city is already doing. Hosting an open house and walk at Mary Beth Doyle Park this Sunday morning from 10 till 11, and welcoming parents and families with children to come with appropriate COVID precautions. And there would be somebody staffing an information table there and telling people about the wonderful wildflowers that are blooming at this time of year. Natural Area Preservation has had seed gathering events, which are wonderful for children because there's no way to make a mistake gathering wild plants, native plant seeds. Wesley Science Center has programs. Washtenaw County Parks has naturalist programs. All of those things are very helpful, and we have to. Sometimes you engage the children, and that engages the parents, as I found out.
Are there, thank you. Are there other questions? All right. I think we should move on, but Mark, thank you so much. These were, I think, really helpful observations, and I'm thinking a little bit about how we could maybe enhance what we're thinking about doing from our subcommittee approach. So we'll let you know what happens next. But thanks so much. You're welcome to stay and watch with us. I'd like to start now with our next speaker. And this is Leslie Kellman, who is a master rain garden volunteer and known as the plant guru in the Washtenaw County rain garden program. I think that's great. And I have been very appreciative that she agreed to come and speak with us. She has personally built 3 rain gardens in her yard and has some data, I think, on the number of rain gardens in the city and their benefits. So I'd like to just turn it over to Leslie right now. And Leslie, if you want to say anything more in introduction, please do. And you said that you were okay with running your screen, is that correct?
I'll give it, I've never done it before, but I'll give it a try.
Oh, okay, well, we can help. If you need that, don't worry.
Okay.
Josh is, okay.
Okay. Oops. Here we go. Is that up?
Not yet.
Okay. Might be better if Josh.
Yeah, I can run it for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
I didn't change it, so thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Let's get, here we go. All right. I just want to make sure this is the right presentation.
This is the right one.
All right. Let me
Okay.
maybe get it zoomed in just slightly so that we can, there we go. Can you all see that all right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, and as Rita said, I am Leslie Kellman. I am a master rain gardener. I've been so since 2015. This is two pictures from different angles of one of my 3 rain gardens. It's the one that I actually did for the class. The other 2 that I did, well, let's just say I learned a lot from the class. I tried them beforehand. The class taught me how to renovate them and make them work. Okay, next slide. Okay, so why put in a rain garden? If you take a look at pretty much, your typical landscape around town, we've got the buildings, we've got a lot of concrete, and we've got a lot of turf grass. The buildings and the concrete, the sidewalks, driveways and that, are impermeable. And the turf grass, it does soak in the water, but it takes a while because it's so dense. And so you're basically interrupting the water cycle when you do that, when that water ends up flowing into, say, the stormwater system instead of into the ground. So the purpose of a rain garden is to collect that water on site in a lower area so that it will infiltrate into the ground. And so you are replenishing that groundwater instead of having it running in the stormwater system, running into the river and creating issues downstream there. And there are really 2 parts, and you can think in a sense of 2 parts to the rain garden. One is that low depression where the water is flowing in. But the other part that really helps are the plants. Okay, and I'll talk more about those in a couple of slides. Okay, go ahead to the next slide there, if you would. Okay, the master rain, okay, one of people instrumental in putting together the course and teaching the course is Shannon Gibb Randall, along with Susan Bryan, who is the rain garden coordinator for the county. So Shannon, jump in anytime here on this one. Okay, and I got this slide from Susan Bryan, the rain garden coordinator for the county. And this is a slide that shows the number of rain gardens built in the city of Ann Arbor since the rain garden program started. And as you can see, there are about 380 as of the end of last year. And in 2010, the first Master Rain Gardener class started. And that was an in-person class that met for about 5 weeks and primarily taught by Susan and Shannon with some other people, staff coming in. In 2015, they got an online rain garden class too that people did, again, once a week. And the class walked through basically how to put together a rain garden. And both classes ran up until COVID pretty much stopped the in-person one at the end of last year. And it's now all online. And even last year with the shutdown, you can see there were still 47 rain gardens built. And from what I understand, okay, the 380s in the city was a residential rain gardens. That doesn't include the ones that you see that have been put in, like, for example, down Miller Avenue, at the schools, at municipal buildings, at private buildings, and so on. So we've got a lot more than that. And from what I understand, throughout the county, there's about 1,000 of them. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, an important part of the rain garden, as I mentioned earlier, are the plants that you put in. And as part of the program, native plants are very strongly encouraged. And they have a very important part. Now, I was a high school science teacher that was primarily earth and physical science. So I tend to think more about what was below the ground here. And one of the important parts of putting the plants into the rain garden is those deep roots that the native plants have. And the plants themselves help filter the sediment going into the rain garden. Those deep roots actually go in there and they help break down the soil so that, for example, if you've got a clay soil, which we have a lot of here in Ann Arbor, the water, those roots will help the water infiltrate into the ground, soak into the ground within a day or two, so you aren't left with standing water that people tend to become concerned about if you talk about things like collecting water from your property. So they do that. Also, those plants, they require water. So water is pulled up from those roots to enable the plant to survive. But then you start taking a look at what is above the ground, the part we see. Okay, plants that we choose, they're host plants for a number of native species. You think about milkweeds and the caterpillar. Not a native species, but you can also think of, and not a rain garden plant, but if you've ever looked at, say, fennel or dill, they are decimated by the swallowtail caterpillars. Okay, so host plants that insects need, for example, in order to survive. You've got the seeds that are for birds, for small animals. So they provide food, they provide shelter to a lot of these animals. So the more of these pollinator plants that you have in your gardens, in your rain gardens, the more diverse plant and animal life you will get. And that really does help kind of stabilize the environment when you have that. And the other thing that doesn't usually get mentioned is those plants are pretty. And so as you look at them, you know, when I put my rain garden in, for example, one of them is sitting near the deck. And one of my goals in retirement was, I want to sit back and just read books, because I never had time to. Well, I find that I have a hard time reading them now, because every time I see something land on one of those plants or scurry around or hear a frog, I've got to get up and go investigate it. And I see a lot more of that now that I've got that rain garden nearby. One of the plants that I can think of as an example when you start talking about diversity is mountain mint. And one day I was just chatting with somebody standing by the mountain mint. I am not an expert on bees, but I was able to distinguish on that one mountain mint plant in bloom, probably about 5 or 6 different species of bees, all on there at the same time. So, you know, pollinators, choosing pollinator plants for your rain garden as well as the other gardens, very important, both above and below ground. Okay, so next slide. Okay, and these are just some examples I took from the rain garden in my backyard, one of the rain gardens. You can see the monarch caterpillar on the swamp milkweed. Bumblebees on a couple of the plants here. One of my favorite plants, just because it's so interesting, is the rattlesnake master and that wasp on there. You know, 5-10 years ago, you wouldn't have caught me walking near a wasp, but I saw that and I was so fascinated, just kept getting closer and closer. So much diversity that you don't see when you don't have a lot of these native plants in there. Okay, last slide, please. Okay, the Master Rain Gardener program itself is still going strong during COVID. In fact, they've actually found that there's an uptick in people taking the course, as there is a lot of interest in gardening now that we're home a lot more. So here's a little bit of information here. As I mentioned, Susan Bryan is the the Rain Garden Coordinator, and she's with Water Resources Commission. You can get a lot of information from that Master Rain Gardener website there, including the information on the course, how to put in your own rain garden, and so on. Also available on that address is a copy of the Rain Gardener's handbook, how to do it. And this is an older copy. It's now downloadable that I got, but it walks you through, the course does, week by week, how to choose a site, how to calculate how large a rain garden needs to be, how to, get in there and get your shovel in there, how to dig it, and so on, how to get the water to the rain garden from your downspouts, and so on. And then, as you mentioned, the course that Susan and Shannon teach is now available online, YouTube, so you can do it at your own pace. Between the two of those, by the time you go through the handbook and the video, you really are ready to you've got your rain garden planned, and you are ready to pull out the shovel or hire somebody else to do it. However, there's also one more source of information for help if you want it, or just advice, or just a chat. And that is, there is a Facebook page that you can get access to when you sign up for the course. And I have no idea how many of us are now on it. But if people have taken the class this is their first gardening project ever. They want to do something good for the environment, for their families, for their home, and don't even know what kind of shovel to buy. I've talked to people when I've helped with the in-person class that are really at that point, and then some of us who've been doing it for years. But you go onto the Facebook page and you ask, okay, here's my site, and you put up a photograph that you got off Google Earth or something. This is what it looks like. Water flows here. What can I do? And people jump right in. You get your questions answered. And one of my problems was, and the reason I got started was, I was getting water in my basement. And, people ask about that. Well, I'm getting water in my basement. What kind of things can I do? How can a rain garden help? What kind of plants should I plant? I've got sunny and clay. What works? One of the discussions that's been going on the last 2 days is, what do you do about the rabbits? The rabbits are eating everything. What kind of plants are rabbit resistant? And so the program itself it's great as far as being able to do something, as I've just mentioned, for your own home, for your family, and for the environment as a whole, keeping it more diverse, keeping it more stable, and so on. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. So I think one of the questions that just comes to my mind is, where does someone find these beautiful plants that you've used in your rain gardens?
There are a number of places you can get them. There are a lot of native plant vendors that you've got some that come to the farmers markets, Ann Arbor and Ipsy farmers markets, that are somewhat local. And one of the handy dandy parts listing, oh, here it is, in the course pack is a list of resources to buy a rain garden, local native plant producers. Also, if you find that you want that rain garden, but your back says, this is not a good idea for me, there are a number of landscape companies, engineering, so on, that have taken the course, and you can hire them to do it for you.
That's great.
And again, one of the handy dandy things that Susan and Shannon put together, as far as, I don't know what to buy, here's a spreadsheet that will also give you ideas. So you can go to the farmer's market, go to the native plant nurseries that are around. And that's really one of the best ways to go. In non-COVID times, though, my favorite are the plant swaps. And the Master Rain Gardeners have them a couple times a year. Other organizations have them. And then if you go on the Facebook page, if you go on, say, if you follow the next door part, gardeners love to share their plants. We don't like killing them,
Right.
as many of us probably know. So, and then if there's something that you really want, there are some online places, but you can really do a great job filling up a beautiful rain garden locally.
Great. I see Steve Brown had his hand up first. Let's go with Steve.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Leslie. That was a great presentation. Around half of all Ann Arbor residents live in apartment complexes.
Mhm.
So I was wondering if you were aware of any programs, either governmental or nonprofits, that try to encourage, the owners of apartment complexes to put rain gardens as part of their landscaping.
I don't know of any. We've had people though in the courses, because I have been up until they were kind of down for a while. I would help out in the morning before the class actually started, and I know I met with people that in their condos, they would go through the whole process and then approach the condo association. I don't know for sure. Shannon, are you?
Yeah, there were a number of people that were from apartment complexes, or that wanted to do it, or that somebody who couldn't do it in their own site would work with somebody who was from an apartment complex. So there definitely were people that came through. The majority were homeowners for sure, but there were definitely people that came through to do that. It is a bigger hurdle to get through the approval process for whatever your building is, but yeah, there were people that took advantage of the program to learn how to do it and execute it in that way.
Okay. Is there any way that we might be able to promote that?
What do you mean promote it? Like that in terms of the Master Rain Gardener program itself, or being able to sort of reach out to apartment complexes themselves to see if people are interested?
Yeah, I mean, reaching out to apartment complex owners to see if they would consider that as part of their landscaping plans.
That's an interesting idea to think about, because oftentimes there's a landscape committee. It would be interesting to be able to give like the resource to a landscape committee that those kinds of things exist, because I think one of the powerful things about rain gardens, as Leslie was saying, is that you're dealing with a couple of different goals that the city has. One is stormwater management, and one is the pollinator piece, and so it's a real twofer in that way. That's an interesting idea, Steve, to think about how to promote it. With many times those things are a little harder to control in those systems, because sometimes things are piped underground and it's a little harder to get access, but not all the time, so I think that's a cool idea.
Yeah,
because the program is really set up to be able to help people in whatever the circumstance is. And if you have a difficult technical situation, like there's folks in the program that help you through that.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Thanks. Kathy Griswold.
I just want to say that I took the class from Susan, and I agree with everything that Leslie said, especially about how the Facebook group is so helpful. Before COVID, there used to be at least one, if not two, potluck picnics and plant swaps every year, and they were a lot of fun. And all of the plants that I received in the plant swap are still alive, and multiplying. So
yes.
I would encourage other people to take the class at least online. So thank you.
Oops. John Mirsky.
Yes. I think since this is an Ann Arbor body, we should also say that the city of Ann Arbor on its website has a webpage on rain gardens. Maybe that's a place, to Steve's question, I was just picking up on his statement, that would be a place where maybe we could actually explicitly have a comment that says people that are living in condos or apartment complexes, this is what you can do. This is who you can contact. That's all. Thanks, Leslie.
Okay, welcome.
Anyone else? I guess I have just one question. Leslie, did you solve your basement problem?
Yes, I did.
Yay.
I mean, I had a little trickle last year, but I think once we yank that deck, which is planned for this spring, I'll be able to, we'll do a little regrading there too. So
yeah,
definitely.
excellent. Great. Well, thank you very much. Any other questions for Leslie among our group? Okay. Leslie, you're welcome to stay. And Josh, I have to ask for a little bit of assistance. Becky Gajewski is trying to get in. She says she can see us, but she has not been able to get visible and audible.
Interesting. Okay. I'm not seeing her. Oh, here we go.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, got her.
Hi, Becky, wherever you are. There you are.
Okay.
Hey.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi.
I'll just give you a really quick intro, and I just want to say thank you to Becky Gajewski for joining us from Natural Areas Preservation. She is a conservation steward, and I've been fortunate enough to work with her a few times on stewarding that I've done in parks, and she is a great resource for us in the city, and I'm so glad that she's part of our team of people that work with us. Becky, I'm going to just turn it over to you now, and you know our theme, so thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Rita. Did you have the slides?
Yes, Josh is going to be running them for you.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Well, while we get that going, oh, here it comes. Great. Thank you very much, Josh. So again, my name is Becky Gajewski, and I'm with Natural Area Preservation. Just a little bit about us for those of you who might not know who we are. We fall under the umbrella of Parks and Rec at the City of Ann Arbor, and we are funded by the Parks Maintenance and Capital Improvements Millage. Our mission is to protect and restore Ann Arbor's natural areas and to foster an environmental ethic among its citizens. And the way we do that is through ecological or habitat restoration. So kind of by definition of what we do, we are restoring pollinator habitat and protecting pollinator habitat every day, basically. The way we do this work is both through staff, using staff and volunteers. And we have work days where folks can come out and help us do things like removing invasive species or doing prescribed burns, collecting and scattering native seeds, all the things that would kind of try to enhance the quality and biodiversity of pollinator habitat. And we even do special events and work days that are focused around Pollinator Week. So we'll do work days that are only focused in prairie areas or wetland areas where we've got lots of good butterflies and insect diversity. We also support independent volunteers in restoring this type of habitat. We have park stewards who adopt certain parks as their own and kind of work in there independently. We'll make work plans together with them to try to achieve maybe goals that they have or goals that NAP in general has, and we'll kind of guide them through that process. We'll give them support with our staff time. We'll do volunteer work days with them. So in addition to us doing all this sort of work, we also empower other folks to do it if they have a particular park that they're really passionate about and they really want to see restored. And Mark is one of our stewards, as a matter of fact, from Mary Beth Doyle. Good to see you, Mark. Another way that we are supporting pollinators through our work is we use an integrated pest management plan, which is basically we try all different kinds of methods to control our invasive pests. We're not just going straight to chemicals or things that could harm pollinators. We're going to first try pulling, hand pulling, or we'll try manually cutting or burning. We want to use the methods that are the most effective with the least amount of impact on non-target organisms. So we want to minimize as much off-target impacts as we can. So we're always thinking about what is a good way that we can accomplish our goals and not have any negative side effects. We also provide project guidance for different big projects that go on throughout the city. So for example, several years ago, there was a big restoration of Traver Creek at Leslie Park Golf Course. And this year, as we speak right now, there is a restoration of Benz Creek at Huron Hills Golf Course. So we are providing input on what native plantings would be good, how can we attract more birds or get more wildlife into these areas. So we get to dip our hands into all kinds of different projects in that way. We also do site plan reviews when those new big developments are coming into the city. We're looking at impacts that those might have on natural areas and pollinator habitats. As much as we can, we want to minimize impact to high quality natural areas. Sometimes we're able to get new parkland out of that. And we're also providing guidance on native plantings, again, like what would be a good seed mix to put down here to get a good diversity of native plants to attract more pollinators. Next slide, please. So we also do a lot of outreach to the community, and we involve folks in citizen science efforts. We've been the Ann Arbor hub for the Michigan Butterfly Network for about 6 years now, I think. And that is an effort that's out of the Kalamazoo Nature Center. It's a statewide effort. They want to get all these different hub cities, is what they call them, on board, where these hubs can recruit volunteers that will go out and survey different butterfly habitats and record all the different butterflies that they can find. So every year we train volunteers to go out to, I think we have routes in about 10 or 12 parks now. And they'll go out and they'll record the butterflies they see, the type of habitat they see them in, how many they see. And this all goes into a national database that can be accessed by researchers and other folks that are studying pollinator diversity and distribution. So we're always actively recruiting more volunteers for that program and sort of collaborating with the folks at the Butterfly Network to get people trained in the survey protocol. Every year we partner with the Leslie Science and Nature Center for their annual Monarch Migration Festival. We will set up a table and talk about our native habitats and why they're important and why we need to restore them and how we can restore them. We'll do little walks to help people identify native plants that are good for butterflies, and we'll sort of assist them as they release tagged monarchs, which is pretty cool. They weren't able to do the festival last year, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, but we hope that maybe this year it will get back on track and we will have a presence there again. We've also partnered with NWF Ann Arbor office in the past to distribute educational materials at public events like the Green Fair, or I think maybe there were some Pollinator Week materials that we distributed. So we're always happy to have those educational materials and try to get them out into the community more. We are also reaching out to the public through our informational webpage on pollinators that we maintain on the city website. We've got posts on our Facebook page, our Twitter page about pollinators and the importance of pollinators. So fostering an environmental ethic among Ann Arbor, this is one of the ways that we do that. We want to let everybody know what sort of cool pollinators they can find if they plant more native plants in their front yard, for example. We just kind of want to spread the enthusiasm about pollinators that we all have as well. Next slide, please. And we've also collaborated with some external partners. With the NWF, Ann Arbor is a signatory of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, which is a program where mayors from cities and villages around the country commit to doing certain actions to benefit pollinators. And there's a whole list of predetermined actions. You can pick and choose which ones you want to sign on for. And then at the end of the year, you submit an annual report talking about how did you achieve all of those different things that you committed to. So we've been a signatory since, I believe, 2015. And since then, there are two levels of commitment, I guess, to this pledge. There's like a leadership circle, and then there's just like a signatory level. So we've been in the leadership circle for several years. I'm not sure if it was from the beginning or not, but for the last several years, we've been in the leadership circle. So we report back to NWF every year about all the things that we've done at NAP, but also throughout parks and any other organizations that I may know of that are helping pollinators. Will kind of just let them know, like, hey, here are all the cool things that we've done. A couple years ago, we also received a grant from the NWF to purchase native seed in order to enhance some of our pollinator habitat. That was very cool. We've also collaborated with the Ann Arbor office of NWF and a group of citizen leaders called the Wolf Pack to establish a pollinator garden at West Park, and that's been going great. An additional project that we've been a part of is called Project Wingspan, and this is by the Pollinator Partnership. We had an ecologist from Project Wingspan come out a couple of years ago to evaluate our pollinator habitats and give us some advice for how we could improve them, like doing different timing of our prescribed burns to try to favor some more of the wildflowers that could come up and be beneficial to pollinators. And as part of that, after we kind of got all of our habitats evaluated, then we also collaborated with Project Wingspan to have them send out teams of trained volunteers to collect native seeds from our prairies, with the idea that those seeds would all be kind of collected and mixed together based on the region of Michigan that they came from, and then redistributed out to other communities that may need some assistance with getting more seed and more diversity into their own habitats. And as a part of that, we were actually awarded some seed material this year that we can redistribute back out into our habitats to try to enhance pollinator plant diversity. We've also worked with the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission, hand in hand with some of their rain gardens, where we've performed prescribed burns and invasive species control in some of these gardens that have good habitat for pollinators. So we are always happy to partner up with other folks in order to sort of further our pollinator efforts. We're always looking for new ideas and new ways that we can get folks excited about pollinators and making better habitats for them. And I think those were all my slides. So there's lots of stuff that we've done, and I probably went through it pretty quick. But yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Becky. I see John Mirsky has his hand raised.
A quickie. I just realized we haven't talked at all about the university. And I'm wondering what we might know about the university in terms of resources, staff, students, arboretum, botanical garden, ...
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, we don't have as much collaboration with the university as you might expect. You know, we're on kind of friendly terms with the folks over there, of course, but yeah, we haven't collaborated on a lot of projects. We have had students from SEAS doing projects in our parks for like the general ecology classes. And we've pitched the occasional master's project over there. So we're connected with the folks in SEAS pretty well, but yeah, not as much with the ARB or the bot gardens. Mark, you look like
Jonathan?
Oh.
Oops.
Sorry.
I just, sorry, I'm looking at electronic hands. And we'll get
Go
to
ahead,
Mark.
Rita.
Oh, I see you, Mark. Thanks.
I couldn't.
Let's go with
electronic
Jonathan
button
Overpeck
for
and then
some
Mark.
reason. Just to that point, there's a brand new director now for Nichols Arboretum and Mathi Botanical Gardens. He just did a public session on Tuesday evening. So he's very interested in partnerships generally. So I think that prospects in that particular direction are very good right now.
And that was all I was going to say.
Ah.
But I think Mark hit it just perfectly because Tony really wants to have partnerships.
That
That
great.
sounds great. Yeah. Anyone else? Well, I can just say that I have learned a lot from NAP and really appreciate the kind of education and the kind of the encouragement to learn about a particular area and apply the kinds of training that they provide, that youth provide, Becky, and others. And I just really appreciate NAP. And I love that I didn't know until I saw in your slides that NAP had been involved with Project Wingspan, which I think is really fabulous.
Yeah.
Oh, wow, more hands. Shannon?
I guess I would just like to say how important I feel like your organization is to the city, and that with very few people, you all leverage hundreds of us working for the city. And I think that model is very powerful. And I think it's a really critical part of how we have the quality of life that we do, because there is no way we could ever afford to pay for the amount of work that gets done by Ann Arbor citizens because you all run a great organization. So I just think it's an incredibly critical and important piece of what makes Ann Arbor what it is. And I just want to offer my gratitude that you all exist in the way that you do.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think the total number of hours that we put in every year, it's something like a third or half of all the total hours is by volunteers, the amount of work that happens. So it is pretty amazing. Nowhere in Ann Arbor, nowhere other than Ann Arbor would we have that amount of effort. So I am also very grateful to all of you.
Kathy Griswold?
I want to acknowledge your excellent communication program. I'm on city council, and whenever I see one of the NAP communications, I say, why can't city council have excellent communications like that? And I have volunteered for NAP, and I'm sure I will again, but congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Jonathan Overpeck?
Sorry, I just forgot to put my hand down.
Oops, okay. Chris Graham.
So a short story to tell. Back years ago, the university and the VA hospital made a deal about a route for connecting Fuller Road around the VA without using Oak Way or Oak, whatever the road was that came up the east side of the VA hospital. So they could enlarge the VA hospital to the east. And the route that was picked went right through a grove of native bur oaks that were 36 inches. And there were a whole group of us that said, no. And while we were debating that issue, it was very clear that that tract of land between what is now Fuller Road and the VA hospital was completely full of amber honeysuckle and big buckthorns, big guys. They'd been growing in there since the 1960s, probably. And in the process of this big debate, almost the entire council and the mayor came out on that property to look at those trees. And in the discussion, it was pointed out that these plants, these invasive exotic plants, would completely destroy the natural areas of Ann Arbor, and we're in the process rapidly of doing so. One of the guys who was present was a Sierra Club member and took the matter back to his group and said, we need to do something. And of course, the question was what to do. And what they did was mount a campaign to establish the millage, to establish the natural areas program in Ann Arbor, to do stewardship on our parks, many of which had the best natural areas existing in the city. First of all, to control invasive species. And with plants that large and that well established across the city in Ann Arbor, this was a big deal. And so in come all of these wonderful volunteers all the way up to Becky and many employees over the years that have transformed our best natural features in the city into, in many cases, thriving native ecosystems. So almost 30 years later, we have this wonderful program that Becky's a part of that reaches out not just through the park system and on our public lands, but has educated the majority of citizens in Ann Arbor. When I started in business in the early 1980s, none of my clients understood what a buckthorn was, what a hammer honeysuckle was, or what any invasive species were. And now almost every client I meet knows very well what they are. There's been a complete sea change. I'm hoping that we have an equal sea change out the native landscape across the city as a whole. We really need to go back to that to have the most sustainable landscape that we can have, the most energy conserving landscape we can have, the most pollinator rich landscape we can have. We're working on that, but maybe next month we'll talk about it. The big deal is we have this really unusual program that Becky represents, and the people of Ann Arbor have spent their tax dollars repeatedly in subsequent millages to keep supporting it. And that's what's really special. Thank you. I'm preaching. I apologize.
I totally agree with your comments, and thank you, Chris, for the history. And Becky, thank you so much for coming to talk with us tonight. So that's really the end of our special presentations for tonight. Does anyone have any other questions or comments for any of our speakers right now before we move? Okay. You're welcome to stay if you want, because we do have discussion of something that might be of interest to you. If not, I'll just say thanks again. And Steve, I think it's back to you for just a couple of quick agenda items.
Yes, thank you. So are you giving me back the floor?
I am.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our March 25th meeting. I hope everybody's had a chance to look at the draft minutes. Do I have a motion to accept them, to begin discussion or of the minutes?
So moved.
John Mursky, do I have a second?
Chris Graham.
Are there any, the floor is open for discussion. Please raise your hand if anybody would like to discuss or make some amendments to the minutes. I see Chris Graham's hand is still up, but Chris.
Apologies, that's hard to remember to take that down.
That's okay. All right, so I don't see any other hands, so let's proceed to a vote. All who All who agree to accept the minutes as written, please raise your hand or say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Hearing none, seeing none, the minutes are approved as drafted. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business. So we have one item on the agenda here, that is the Chapter 40, the Title 3, Chapter 40 modifications to try to encourage more natural features. And so, let's see, there was a document attached to the there's a document attached for this. I think it'd probably be a good idea to display it. And Josh, could you put that document up and on your screen? And while that's happening, let me just say that I finally got heard back from the Transportation Commission and from the Disability Commission, and they both said that they've looked over these, they discussed this sometime last fall, and they both had sort of decided that they were okay with raising the height limit from 12 inches to 18 inches, and that they didn't want to revisit it. So they did not accept my proposal to have a joint working group with the three of us to work through these. They wanted to wait and see what the Environmental Commission wanted. So I don't think let's see how far we can get today, but I think this is something that will probably take up more time than we have left tonight. So, but let's get started. Thanks, Josh, for putting this up.
Josh, can you blow that up a little bit more?
So I'm not sure where this document came from, Rita.
This is a combination. So it has a sort of a header page identifying some goals of what we wanted to do with Chapter 40. And then subsequent is the actual, it's a cut and paste from Chapter 40 from the city's municipal code for the section on trees and other vegetation. So this is what is displayed with the red highlights is just areas where we had some comments about height. When we first talked about this, this chapter of the city code, the issue had to do mostly with height and safety. And I worked with Council Member Griswold to come up with a list of goals that you see on the left that we wanted to talk about. Why are we doing this? And it does have a number of environmental reasons, and it also has an important one with respect to safety. And the last one I think is also important, the education in the community. From my perspective, I would like to see us make some changes in this, potentially more than just the height things, and that's why it would be great to just have this discussion tonight. And the reason is, from my perspective, that we passed, or I'm sorry, I wasn't on the commission when the integrated pest management resolution was passed by the commission and by city council, but this really, I think, goes with this. We would like to see, as Chris Graham and John Mirsky and all of you have said, we'd like to see less turf grass and the minimization of use of pesticides for control of whatever may be of concern to someone. And so this is potentially a way for us to start moving in that direction. The relaxation of height of plants and the location of plants, I think will help. And I think that the other thing that as far as like a point of discussion that I'd like to have is the how do we enforce something, or do we need to enforce something when we're asking people to install more native plants that make yards look different from the simple mowed turf grass yards. And I think we saw, particularly with Leslie's presentation tonight with the rain gardens, that there is great beauty in these different looking gardens and great function. And I think we'd like to see that, and it really fits in with sustainability. So I'll just leave that as my opening comments. And Hi, John. What would you like to say?
I have a process question.
Yeah.
Do you want to present this and open it up for discussion? You want to assume that we've all read it, which I have, but I don't know if others had a chance, and then just open it up for discussion right away? What's the process or approach you want to take in terms of?
Yeah. Well, could I ask, has everyone had a chance to read it? That's really the fair kind of thing. And I can't tell.
Yeah, I've had a chance, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Is it pretty much yes for everybody? I hope. Okay. So I guess I would like to discuss. I don't expect us to come to a decision tonight or necessarily to get into the very, very specifics, but I'd like to go over the concepts and talk about how things might change. And I'd like to hear, Kathy has a comment or question right now too.
Okay, yeah, I just have a suggestion in terms of process, and that is if we can agree on what our goals are and we can compare our ordinance to what's being done in Traverse City and Grand Rapids, just for comparison, I think that would be helpful, and then we can go back. And I don't think we need to wordsmith the actual ordinance. I think if we agree on the goals, and the other thing is we need to agree on what needs to go in the ordinance and what supporting documentation we need. Because if our goal is going to be education oriented rather than enforcement, then we're going to need quite a few documents or references to rain gardens would be one. I mean, we've talked about some of this tonight, pollinators. And I did talk to the city administrator today, and I said, we want education, not enforcement. And he said, well, I don't have the staff for that. But then as we talked about it, he said, well, maybe neighborhood. So if we had education material online and we also had opportunities for neighborhoods to be educated rather than individuals, I think we could significantly reduce the enforcement. And I really see sustainability driving this. And my main concern is vegetation hanging over sidewalks and corner sight distance issues that I've had for a couple of decades. But I'm willing to let that be secondary to sustainability because I think that's the community's interest right now. And I also think that's where there's funding to get something done.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thanks.
Ooh, lots of hands. John?
A few quick comments. I really like the goals. I like all of Kathy's comments. I would make two suggestions relative to the goals. We emphasize pollinators here, and I'd like this to be maybe a little bit broader and say something maybe like, I don't know, ecosystem benefits or something that takes into account also birds and other kinds of creatures. So whatever the professionals on this phone call that know this stuff better than I do, I'd like to see a more expansive view of that reflected here. And in terms of, and I don't know if this is a goal or if it should be reflected somewhere else. When I was still working, the company that I had large properties where we did a lot of conversions of turf grass to native prairies and other ecosystems. And when we had to go to the city, our discussions focused on intent versus neglect. The city did not want this to appear that we were neglecting our property, but that there was intent for a prairie here, or there was intent for whatever it was. And that will also then prevent people from coming back with an excuse who are really just neglecting their property and saying, oh, I'm just letting everything go to a natural prairie state, which may be fine, but I think we should have some kind of discussion along those lines of what is intent and with what is neglect relative to all this stuff. So those are some initial thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks. Great. Shannon?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think this is a great idea. There are very few rain gardens that are in the right of way. Just to kind of, it's important to clarify this because I know of two where people have the rain garden in between the sidewalk and the back of the curb. There's very few places where people have that because it's full of utilities. You have to get special, you know, I mean, it's not an easy task to do that. There's a lot of trees that are in the way. And so most rain gardens are really happening on the other side of the sidewalk, on your property side of the sidewalk. So I think we should just be careful about how we're wording this because it's really like we never allow, you know, developers to put anything in the right of way in terms of stormwater. Really, stormwater should mostly be outside, you know, of the right of way because it is important to be able to have visibility and things like that. And again, there's just a lot of conflicts with utilities and things like that. They can happen. It's just it has to be done really carefully. So it's not your sort of low hanging fruit, easy thing to do. I would also say that I think we should keep it to 36 inches and not 42 inches. Because I think 42 is really getting into the zone of blocking people's views. And I know that, you know, providing view lines non-obstructed, blah, blah, blah. I think it's just easier for people to have a clear number than to have to kind of prove the case of, you know, whether this flower head is, you know, is blocking the view or not. And there are plenty of plants, of native plants that fit that bill to be in that what they call the hell strip, you know, that can be that short. And there are lots of native plants that are taller too, but we really don't want the super tall ones in that section because, you know, it is really important to have the safety piece here. It really is. I'm all for the native stuff in here. It's a terrible place for grass to grow in general. I think that all makes sense, but it's super important that that we just see somebody coming. I know there's some places like, and I'm also curious about this with like, you know, there's some places where there's like big shrubs and things like that that people have in these zones where streets are coming at intersections that are just behind the sidewalk where they're just completely blocking people's ability to be able to see around the corner. And there are some places like along Huron where I bike on the sidewalk because there is no place for there's no bike lane there and I need to connect to, you know, into the neighborhoods. And if I'm coming down at this intersection of 7th and Huron, people coming up 7th, they can't see me and you're coming too fast on a bike. And so I think we really need to start looking at these places where there are crashes and there are issues to really start some enforcement in some places where the safety really is an issue. And I get it that people want to screen their house from the busy road, that kind of thing, but we really have to be careful about that too. So I would kind of like this to do two things. One is to promote native plants and to be able to give people the, you know, the idea that, you know, that this can work, to be able to plant things in that health strip area, but also to be really mindful about just not creating undue, you know, challenges for people to see, for drivers to see pedestrians and bikers. And again, as somebody who works with native plants all the time, you can do it in 36 inches and under. You really, especially in that area, because things tend to get shorter in that area because it's so hard to grow in that zone. So that's my 2 cents. I think it makes a lot of sense. I totally agree with John too about, you know, intent versus neglect, because it gives anybody in native plants a bad name if you just stop mowing and then say, if this is my native garden, when there isn't one native plant in there, you just don't want to mow, you know? So I think it's important to for people to have intent and to have, you know, a design or whatever it is to be able to kind of pull that off. And so I don't know if we can walk both sides of this thing in terms of the encouragement and the enforcement, but I think it's great that you all are taking this on, because I think that it can serve lots of goals of the city with this. So thank you for taking it on.
Thanks. We'll be back for advice for sure.
Okay, no problem.
But I just want to comment that I kind of think of the things that you just raised and John's as one that of kind of courtesy, that you design and maintain something in a way that's courteous for your neighbors, so that people can see adequately and they can open a car door next to the curb adequately, so that your plants that you like don't get broken by a car. There are ways you can place things, I think. So just that's my comment on it. Steve, you're next.
No, yeah, I agree. This is all good. I agree with all the comments that people have made. I would just like to point out a few things, and that is that, yeah, that intersection between Huron and 7th is a bit unusual because 7th has a significant dogleg there, you know? So that's a peculiar situation, and but it is bad. And I think 36 inches is probably adequate, but actually, you know, in my neighborhood, it's not any of the vegetation that's blocking the view, it's the parked cars, especially the SUVs and the pickup trucks. So, you know, they are a much bigger problem than anything I could plant there. And I would say, you know, standing on the sidewalk, they go up to 5 feet. So that's 60 inches.
Wow.
So I don't know how, you know, when I think about relative risk, it's more the parked cars for me than anything that I see here, because, you know, the city has planted a lot of large mature trees in the lawn extensions. And so these trunks can be up to 2 feet in diameter. And they can be, you know, they do certainly block a view, but it's not as bad as the cars that are parked along the street. So I just want to point that out. And the other thing is that I thought, you know, about the rain gardens and the lawn extensions, I thought it might be a good aspect for stormwater management to actually try to divert some of the runoff from the drains into, like, with a curb cut into a rain garden on the curb, you know, in the lawn extension. But you know,
From the street to the extension? Is that
yeah,
what you're thinking?
yeah.
It really has to be super planned because
Oh.
they're generally not big enough for all the road runoff that's coming towards them. And it has happened in certain places, but it really has to be something that's kind of on a larger scale to be able to do that. So it's happening in places where it's a new development and you can look at it that way. But piecemeal, it's pretty tough to be able to make that happen, because it's generally, they'd have to be very low. Your sidewalk would get exposed on the side because you have to have it lower than the road.
Right.
So it's tricky.
I understand that. Yep. And okay, so but I think this is a great initiative. Now the question is, who's going to take responsibility for this as a goal? Who's going to lead it? Kathy? Kathy's been the main person here. Okay, Kathy. So you want to form a work group to share some of the work if you need one?
I'm hoping that Rita will join me, and possibly Shannon will at least provide a review, because she's got a great perspective because she agrees with me. No, just
I'm happy to review. Yeah, I can't be a normal part of the working group, but I'm happy to review things.
Oh, okay, that would be great. And just
great.
for background, I have been working on this since 1995, and I believe in the last 2 decades, the situation has worsened at corners. And Ravenna and Jackson is another area that gets reported as being a violation on a regular basis, and the hedge gets trimmed about 6 inches and then it grows another foot. So I feel very strongly that this is the right time, because not only is it sustainable in terms of the plantings, but if we want more people to walk and bike instead of drive, they have to feel safe. And we also have our Vision Zero goal. And just one of the technical details is that most people tend to, if they're approaching an intersection, they stop where they can see the oncoming traffic. And if they can't see the traffic at the stop bar, then they keep going. And many times they're not stopping until the middle of or past the crosswalk. And at that point, it's too late to stop for the pedestrian who might be there. So that's another reason that this visibility is very important. I just want to mention one other thing, and that is we went to court, the city did, regarding the language in 3.16, and this gets back to John's comment about intent. And the language states that it has to be a planned natural landscape. So it can't be just something that's developed or that was natural when you bought the land. But when we tried to argue that it had to be planned natural landscape in court, and that was a matter of two neighbors disagreeing, the judgment was against using the term planned natural landscape. So did I confuse people with that?
No, Kathy, I mean, wouldn't it all come around to like, you need to show the plan? You need to have this documented in some way, shape, or form?
That doesn't stand up in court. And this was sort of a little wild area on the side of a property that was still being renovated. And the neighbor next door didn't like it, as I'm told, and sued. And so the neighbor with the unplanned natural area was fined, and he fought it in court, and the judge found in his favor, not the city's, because a planned natural area was considered to be vague and not easy to define.
Jeez.
Could you scroll to that section, Josh, so that
that's 316.
right?
Yeah,
it's not on our screen.
Right. Okay. So it's the area
you.
that's in red on the first line.
Mhm.
So I agree with John. We need to have intent, but I think we need to be careful in what the language is, especially in the ordinance. And I'd like to see less detail in the ordinance and more supporting documents that could be used for educational purposes.
And I'd suggest that we have some great consultants that came and talked to us tonight too,
Yes.
from Wild Ones and then that Rain Garden Group and others, that we can test out, the direction that we go with this. I hope. I would hope that you all would consider that. I see Chris has a comment.
So it seems like we're talking about a number of different things here. 316 refers to vegetation on private property. And I see no business of the city on private property unless there's a view line problem, or unless there are noxious weeds. And one tends to get noxious weeds if one just lets the European grasses and weeds grow, rather than having an intended or tended landscape with our native plants, for example.
One of the problems was when housing was being repossessed a little over a decade ago. Banks would repossess property and not maintain it at all.
Of course not.
And so this ordinance was used to require the bank to maintain the yard because it negatively reflected on the neighborhood.
Okay, I think that's a really different issue than what we do in the right of way.
Oh, absolutely, yes. But that's why one of the reasons 316 is here.
Well, it needs work.
Okay, yeah, I agree.
So the right of way. This is some of the most inhospitable planting territory we have. It is highly compacted soil. It's often fill soil. It's full of salt. It gets snow piled up 3 feet deep in the winter. It has trees, many of which have serious roots along in the soil, which makes it almost impenetrable. Apart from view lines, safety view lines at corners and curves. I agree with Shannon, 36 inches is quite adequate to do a native planting that works. I don't think we need to allow 42 inches there ever. Maybe an occasional flower. And not rain gardens. That's really complicated, as Shannon says. Not to speak of highly compacted soils that don't perk. So it seems to me the most important part of this is view lines on curves and corners.
Mhm.
And that might extend into private property, which means 316 needs some work on curves and corners. I have often said that one cannot just quit mowing in our European dominated flora environment. We get weed grasses and we get European weeds, some of which are very noxious, like Canada thistle. An intended landscape, a tended landscape has to mean not our invasive exotic weeds. It also, I think, means, at least your goal should say, no woody plants in the street lawn except limbed up trees. Most of them either need serious pruning, which tends to get out of hand, or they get out of hand and block views. This is such a complicated issue. But I think you really need to separate private property from the right-of-way and keep heights in the right-of-way low and make sure the landscape there really makes sense from the standpoint of ecology. I had one client who had managed her front yard for decades as a knee-high kind of woodland prairie, and she'd managed the street lawn that way. This was in a cul-de-sac where there was absolutely no issue about view lines, safety view lines. The neighbor complained when some nice flowers got up about mid-calf or just below the knee last spring before last. The city zoning official came out and ordered my client to cut it down. I've always been offended about the way the city works with its zoning enforcement. It issues an order to respond to a complaint before it even investigates the complaint with the person complained against. And then in this case, which that didn't happen, but in this case, she might have learned that these were native plants and well within the height restrictions of the city and didn't need to be cut down despite the fact the neighbor complained. Judges wouldn't be much better if someone goes to court and sues. Judges aren't going to know. We really need our zoning enforcement people to be, first of all, easier on their orders. They need to look before they leap and maybe a bit more educated, and not just in this area. So there's a lot of stuff involved in dealing with these street lawns and neighbors and complaints and all of these things that are behind this discussion. But 36 inches is high enough. Tended or untended or planned or authentic ecosystem elements or something needs to be fit in there that makes the things that get planted in street lawns, not including woody plants except limbed up trees, work and be defensible and somehow make the job for the city easier, at the same time safer for people. The issue about blocking of views on private property at corners and curves, that's a tough one.
Anything else, Chris? 'Cause I think, I know there's a lot there.
This is difficult, but
Yeah.
I'm beginning to understand why we're talking about it. And thank you, Kathy, for being here and explaining some of the background. I've been.
You're welcome. I don't know if people can see this very well, probably not, but it's actually a diagram of a site distance triangle that used to be part of the ordinance until it was taken out. And I found it very helpful because people could understand it. And if we can't put it in the ordinance, we need to have it in the training material. So I'll have this to share at the next meeting.
It ought to be in the ordinance. It ought to
Pardon
be
me?
in the ordinance. We have other diagrams in the UDC.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. It just.
The problem is that it varies from street to street in terms of the speed limit. So site triangles change based on how fast the street is. So it's not a one size fits all kind of thing, but I think it's one of those things that I don't know, it feels like just having some simple something to be able to get the point across to people, but it does change if it's a 45-mile-an-hour street than if it's a 25-mile-an-hour street.
But our ordinance refers to the AASHTO Green Book, which isn't available for download unless you spend about $200 or you go to City Hall and ask to borrow it. Right. So it would be good, I think, to have at least some guidelines.
Yep, I agree.
Does the Green Book have diagrams in it that work at every speed limit, every 10 miles an hour or whatever?
As I remember, it has multiple diagrams. Shannon probably is more familiar with it.
And it has formulas for all the different speed limits, and there's just different conditions. So, but I don't know, it seems like there's got to be some simple way to get the point across and address 80% of the situations.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Right.
so.
I kind of like, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say there's not a lot of 45-mile-an-hour streets that we have that have residential driveways coming off of them, you know, very few. So
I was just going to say that if we take a neighborhood approach, people know their neighborhoods and can analyze. And if we do get that kind of coordination, that would be a great thing. It's big, but it would be really good. And I think that people could then help each other solve the problems.
even if we had them for the most common speed limits for neighborhoods, which would be like 25. And most of it is 25, but if you live in a busier street, you know, most of them are up to 35. And so even if we had diagrams for those three scenarios of 25, 30, and 35, you know, maybe that would go to, you know, 97% of all the different cases that we have in Ann Arbor.
Thanks. Whose hand? I thought I saw another hand.
I see John and Stephen.
Yeah. John Mursky.
Josh, could you go up to page 1 in the goals? I'd like us to consider whether or not, in light of the last goal, focus on education of the community, we can include a statement under goals that says something to the effect that we are trying to promote a new aesthetic when it comes to both extensions and private properties. And what I mean by that, I'm thinking, and I think the advertisements still run, but they ran all the time when I was a kid, this aesthetic that the Scott's Company tried to promote of a perfect green monoculture supported entirely by chemicals as the desirable aesthetic. And admittedly, I fell for that in the past. And I think what we want to say is, in the town of Ann Arbor, we want to promote a new aesthetic that does all of these things that are reflected in the goals, and say there's a new, we want to see beautiful in a different light than what is portrayed to us on television by the Scott's Company and by others. And maybe we can include that in there. And I'd like to also plant a seed that I've thrown out before, and I don't remember the context. I know Rita and I have talked about it. And that is, with regards to 316 private property, there are still in Ann Arbor areas where there's very, very large sections of turf grass. And I'm just going to call off some that I think are examples. And this is a part of town I know better than, say, the west side. So I'll use some on the east and northeast side, like Glacier Hills, like Concordia, like the Lutheran Synod next door, like Pittsfield Village, like several of our schools in some of the corners, apartment complexes, condo complexes, where there are just huge swaths of turf grass. And you know, some of those are necessary and nice for kids to play and things like that. But it just seems to me that it would make sense if we can, through the education in the community and through this new aesthetic, get people to appreciate that natural habitat, like we've been talking about the whole evening, is really something that we desire in Ann Arbor. At least we value it equally, put it that way, to the old aesthetic. And I think in the past, what we're talking about here has been, let's say, undervalued by the vast majority of sort of traditional property owners and homeowners. So that's my thought.
I like it. Steve?
Yeah. So I have a few comments, but or suggestions. But so Josh, could you turn it back to the second set of pages, the 316? And while he's doing that, I just want to say that, you know, in terms of neighborhood education, my neighborhood at least has a lot of block parties, at least before COVID. And I think block parties are known by the city. City staff knows where they are and when they are. And that this is an opportunity to try to get volunteers or city staff out there to just talk to the people that are out there at the block party. Okay, so I would just suggest that as a neighborhood outreach activity.
I'm gonna hire you, Steve, as a block party crasher.
I've done it before.
There's usually good food and beer.
On my bike, yeah, on my bike. So, and then I only have two more comments. One is with 316. You know, when I read this about this language about obstructing or blocking the sidewalk or the street must be trimmed in order to allow 8 feet of clearance for streets and sidewalks. It's kind of ambiguous to me, you know, where you count the 8 feet. Like, where does that calculation start and end, you know? So
it used to be the surface of the roadway, and it's 8 feet of vertical clearance. I know staff recommended the word vertical be added.
Yep.
Oh, okay. So we're just talking about 8 vertical feet.
Yes.
From the street, but how far back from the sidewalk? Do you go just to the edge of the sidewalk?
It used to be 6 inches from the edge of the sidewalk. That's no longer in our ordinance, and I don't know, maybe Shannon knows if that's in the green book.
I don't know that it is, and I definitely agree with the 8 feet of vertical clearance, because I thought that I was thinking the same thing that Steve was thinking, like, how are you managing that? But I know that it is in the code that you, like, if you're planting street trees, that you have to have 8 foot clear for until you have the first few branches. But I think that there also is code, I know, that says that anything around a fire hydrant has to have 6 inches, no higher than 6 inches in height, with a radius of 6 feet around the whole thing. So just in terms of, how this would work, that's just good information to have in general. I don't remember if there's anything about, in terms of the Orange Book, like where that there's that thing with height in there. I can't remember.
Okay. And my last comment is that in terms of the enforcement, I mean, I think 3 days, there's nothing in here that I saw about issuing a warning first. Nothing about a warning. And then it says the city can come in with at least 3 days prior notice to commencing the work and then billing the property owner. 3 days is not a lot of time. Somebody can be out of town on a 3-day vacation and just find out about this. So I think, it seems like just too short a time, without a warning, and then, at least a week or two. So you can make sure that people have at least had a chance, if they're on vacation, they come back and find it, or that a notice is put up on their front door or something,
I've been asserting that it's not just sending a order. It's contacting the homeowner or property owner and saying, what's going on? You've had a complaint against you. Exactly. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? What's your thinking?
Yeah, exactly.
What's going on before order gets issued? It's more than just giving more time. It's entering a dialogue with people before you come down on them with police power.
Yeah,
amen. Zoning order is.
Yep. Amen to that. Okay, I'm done. So
I subscribe to John's complaint about such large areas of grass that is not recreational.
So is there a way for us to, this doesn't have to be solved tonight, but I would like to know a way to do outreach to those large landowners of large properties that is currently turf grass. I feel like that's
we definitely need
an issue.
But it does need to be understood.
Those are mowed every week, and in many cases, there's chemicals applied, and it just seems crazy.
But unless you factor in to the cost, the environmental cost, the true costs of those actions, grass is the cheapest thing to do for property owners. It's not just a cliche that plays out. It's also the least expensive to install, the least, without factoring in the true environmental cost, the least expensive thing to maintain. I think we're all learning that doesn't make sense anymore. I hope we are.
Yeah. But I can talk to the sustainability office, because I'm wondering if it would make sense to have a goal of like eliminating 10% of our turf grass by a certain time, and then actually estimating what the cost is of having that turf grass and what the savings would be to the environment. Okay. I knew you'd like that, John.
If we did a true accounting,
it's measurable, it's achievable.
Yeah, well, I see an unintended consequence potential here, because California, decades ago, people just replaced their turf grass with AstroTurf.
Plastic is not necessarily a better answer, but
no.
We have at least one example of that in town, and it's frightful.
So we should remember that when this is rewritten, that AstroTurf is not a substitute.
Okay, I'm writing that down. Any other comments?
The pollinator group is taking front and center in the lead on getting rid of turf grass, and I'm very excited. Thank you very much, Rita.
And Leslie has her hand up.
Oh, good. Leslie?
You're muted, Leslie.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, when you get to the education part, one of the things that I found successful with the rain garden program is, show the pictures of, some of these that you've seen around the neighborhood, of the successful ones. And also mention things that really, like you mentioned, the invasives. Most of us recognize, well, some of us recognize that buckthorn, for example, buckthorn seedlings, Canada thistle, and a lot of these other things, in some cases that people think are native, that really aren't. And, so make sure that kind of thing is in there. I mean, obviously treating it very positively, but also putting in there, no, this isn't the native stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the education also has to kind of include, the parts about maybe not specifically saying when rain gardens make sense or when, a desert type landscape makes sense. But, that needs to be in there too, those kind of options. And because, I have seen a few, like Shannon said, there aren't very many, some really well done rain gardens, and people do have the conditions for those. But like I've got, 3 rain gardens in my yard. If I had a better, stronger back, I'd put more in.
Mm-hmm.
But that extension, I cannot do that. It is southern exposure, big fat sycamore, and dry. So, the whole condition part too has to really be included when you start talking education in that and giving those suggestions.
Great.
Well done. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you all. This is really, really helpful. So you can tell that there's going to be some significant work here, but I think it's going to be worth it. I want to just mention that I also attended a webinar this week that was based in Toronto that was phenomenal. And when I got the video, the recording of it, I want to pass it around to you all because it talked about biophilic approach to their city, and that sounds really, really vital is the way I would say it. And it's based on, to some extent, some native traditions, which I think you'll all find very interesting. So anyway, that's yet to come. So I thank you all. Oh, Leslie, did you have another thing you wanted to say? Is your hands up? And okay, thank you. All right, I think I appreciate this, and I'm ready to turn it back to you, Steve.
All right, thanks Rita and Kathy. So next item on the agenda is new business, and there is no new business. So we pass on to reports from committees. Natural features.
We're still working on the amendments to UDC, which have become really significant, actually. The core of it is trying to protect the native forest fragments of the city. And there really are 3 levels of those. One are native forest fragment natural areas. Most of those are on our parks and are being cared for by the Natural Areas Preservation Program. If they're not on our parks, they should be. The second are typically younger native forest fragments that can be identified in, I think, best in the 1960 aerial photos to the extent they cover the city. The reason for that time is that it precedes the invasion of Ann Arbor by invasive exotics, which blurred the ability to see these features, which have been undeveloped so far, and there aren't many. The third level of native forest fragment are areas of the city with those second growth native trees that have been developed, mostly with housing under them. Otherwise, they would have been utterly destroyed. And most of those where the trees have survived were developed prior to the arrival of four-wheel drive lifts and vehicles parking all over the property and trenching all over the property and things that fundamentally destroy trees in the vicinity of houses. There are neighborhoods on the Old West Side, for example, with 36-inch oak trees 6 feet from the house, perfectly happy. If that house was built today, they'd be gone. So viewing those three levels and saying that those are core areas for expressing sustainability on outward into the neighborhoods they're in, for doing what we need to do to regenerate those trees, which generally is not happening, especially in the developed portions, for using them as anchors or guiding posts in the neighborhoods where they exist to increase the sustainability of our landscape. The recognition that these trees are what were here before Europeans came here. And they came back on properties that were not farmed or otherwise had their soil turned so that the seed stuck in the soil was destroyed and weren't developed roads and paving and housing and buildings. We have this treasure source to build on. So the amendments to UDC that we're trying to do is really inventing something more than we had in the early 1990s, an understanding of a basis upon which we can build a base of sustainability, a base of ecological restoration work across the city, and do so with an outreach program that reaches out to neighborhoods. I think 2 sets of neighborhoods. One set has a native forest fragment, one set was farmland and needs a different kind of restoration effort. But where we reach out to try to gain more sustainability based on the ecosystems that were here in 1824.
Okay.
We're trying to reflect that in the amendments, and we're getting close.
Okay, great, Chris. Thank you. Pollinators? Gabby or
Gabby, I think, is planning to talk.
Gabby?
I don't see her.
She seems to have dropped off.
I think she did. Okay. Well, I'll just say that we have met. We've been kind of moving through our pollinator allies, talking with them, and kind of compiling lists of the groups that we feel are active and contributing to pollinators in the city. And our ex-commissioner, Carrie Slavik, has been putting together some information that we're hoping to submit to NAB to update the pollinator website, and appreciate that support. So that's really primarily where we're going. I will say that one other group that we're going to be talking with soon, that Lily and I are going to talk with, is the city golf course staff that maintain the Monarchs in the Rough properties, because I think we can learn a lot from them as to how they deal with large spaces. And I know that Becky, you certainly have that experience, and Shannon as well, but it's just another perspective that I think might be helpful. So that's where we are.
Okay,
great. And I think we'll be looking at all the notes that I took from this meeting tonight, and trying to get some things back to you soon.
Right. Oh, Shannon has her hand up.
Yeah, just a thought that occurred to me, Rita, while you're here and while Becky is here, that I think would be interesting is to pilot some alternative kind of clover lawn types. I know that there's some interesting kind of micro clovers and people are using white clover as some lawns. And I think that it would be interesting to have some places in the city where we're testing this to see what it looks like on city land. People can go and visit it and see what it looks like. And it's something that kids can still run around on and things like that. These are like, they're a real thing in these too. I know like one of my employees used to work in the Arbor, and she used to go walk barefoot there once in a while, and she got stung several times going through the clover lawn thing too. And so that's a real thing also, you know, it's, but I just think it would be, so many people don't use their lawn for recreation that I think it would be kind of cool to have the city try that in a few places. And it just seems like we could use one of our city parks or one of the, you know, something where it gets mowed too. And people can just see what it looks like and have the city test it out, because it's one thing to kind of find these things on the internet, and it's another thing to actually test it here. Here's what the seed mix is. Here's where you can find it. This is what it really takes to put it together. And I just think that it's great for people, for like on our website or whatever, to say, go to this park to see X product and see what it looks like. That is just less vague about, well, you could try this or this, and you're kind of not really sure if it's going to work. And I just think it would be an interesting partnership between your committee and some of NAP's work and the parks work to be able to promote some of these things and just evaluate them, see how they work, see how they hold up, see what they do. So
I know there used to be one in the botanical gardens. There were like 4 different grass types and the traditional turf grass that was available. I don't know if that's still installed or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it'd be neat to put it in a place where people really use it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, not just a little square somewhere, but like a section of West Park where people are walking on it and their dogs running on it, and you know what I mean? I think it would be interesting to try that. So while you two are both in the room.
Great. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So we move to solid waste. I'll just say that recent conversations with city staff, the city staff is busy extending contracts and developing RFPs for the downtown alleys problem to try to solve that. And also the, still working on the MRF development. For the C&D ordinance work, the city staff is becoming a full co-partner with me in trying to develop this ordinance and gather data and move this project forward, which I very much welcomed. You know, that's very important to buy-in, is getting the staff involved in a leadership role as co-leaders for this. Lisa, do you want to say anything about the zero waste work group?
Yeah, first I want to thank John Mirsky, because you have turned my procrastination into a virtue. The fact that I have not yet peeled the leaves out of my garden has now made me a star. So the zero waste working group is so busy. So we have one subgroup that's working on a definition of zero waste, and that's floating the idea of setting a zero waste goal with a timeline. We have another subgroup that is working, that is researching reusable carryout containers, reusable food containers. And there's a couple of different ways of establishing these programs. One is each individual restaurant does its own thing. That's okay. But the fact is that people don't eat out at the same restaurant every single night. And so to my mind, the better approach is if you get a network of restaurants together and they get the reusable stuff from the same place, and you can bring your reusable thing back to any restaurant that's part of this network. It means that the reusable plastic gets more use because it's all polypropylene, whichever way you go, it's polypro, and that does not recycle. But if you can use it up to 1,000 times. So how do you get those 1,000 uses, not going every single time to the same place? So we're looking at this. There are a couple of restaurants that are interested in doing this. I'm not sure which model they have in mind. We're hoping to catch them early so we can steer them towards the way that might make more sense. So that's another. Then there's another subgroup, and that group is John Callowart and me and Jenny Petoskey, and we are working up a grant, a next cycle grant, to produce metrics for a circular economy. So there's very little operationalizable measures of approaching circular economy, and most of the measures that we have for tracking our progress on solid waste tracks diversion from the landfill. So it tracks end of life. It doesn't track what we're doing to reduce waste at the start of the process and design it out of the process and reduce consumption and all of that. So we are working on a grant for next cycle, or there are other places we can try that. And then finally, there's a subgroup of sustainability ambassadors who are working on composting and food waste. So that is lots of stuff going on, and many meetings on my calendar, and also Jenny Petoskey's calendar, who is just amazing. So.
Sorry, I muted myself. Sorry. Well, thank you. Thanks, Lisa. So let's move on to the other commissions, Planning Commission. Shannon?
Really the most pertinent thing in terms of crossover is the TC1 zoning, the transportation oriented zoning. And we've continued to work on that. It's getting very close at this point. And so I think the council's, what was it, June, I think, that it was supposed to come in front of them. And I think we're gonna, hit our target, but it's just continuing to be fine-tuned. We continue to get more feedback from the community. And the general idea is kind of make it more broad if you can. And so that's essentially, I think, what from the time that it has started, where it was just one area to now like multiple areas. And now it's not even naming specific zones. It's more like a little bit more generalized. And then also the GIS department created this really cool tool so that you can see what the setbacks mean for some of these different areas. And it's kind of full steam ahead, and just getting more and more refined. So, and I know people that are thinking about, doing development under it. And so it's interesting to see it going. So we'll see how it goes. But I think that's pretty much it though, in terms of things that relate. Lisa, any other ideas you would have? Yeah, okay.
Well, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, that's great news. So let's see. Parks is not here. Mike Apple's not here. Energy.
Two highlights from the Energy Commission in our last meeting. The first was we had a presentation on the Greenbelt, which I sent to all of you because I thought it might be of interest. The key takeaway there, we were interested in terms of what types of opportunities there might be in terms of renewable energy generation, but also biosequestration. In terms of renewable energy generation, there is a limitation that buildings and structures must be less than 2% of the property. And there's another problem with generation, and that is someone is not allowed to generate energy and transmit it across the property line unless that's in concert with DTE. So it makes it difficult for someone to do it on their own. They basically can't, because they're not going to be using that much on their property. And if they do more than that, then they have to coordinate with DTE. And if they wanted to do more on their property, then the 2% is the limitation. The other thing that we talked about is planned updates to the energy code. And those will be decided this year and what the process is going to be, how to influence it. And the highlight there is that there's probably going to be an increase in the base efficiency. Right now, Michigan is operating on a 2013 code, and there's been 2 revisions since then. And we're hoping that the newest revision will form the baseline. And those revisions are done every 3 years. And the other option that we're hoping will come through is an appendix that municipalities can adopt that would allow us to mandate what's called the zero code. And I won't get into a lot of details, but it basically is what it sounds like, is that you're basically targeting net zero with as much as what you can do on the property, and then requiring that offsets or sinks be bought off the property to get to net zero. And one last thing, I just saw Becky drop off. I was going to tell her I was admiring the posters behind her the whole evening. So that's all. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thanks, John. So let's move on to council. Is there a report from council? Kathy, Lisa?
I have something on the Gelman plume that I've been working on that I guess is council related. I think everyone knows that it was determined that a dual process was feasible and allowed by EPA. The concurrence letter from the governor's office was sent on April 12th. It was actually sent by Lisa Clark, who's the director of Eagle. And that's something that we've been working on probably for years. I'd like to thank Ryan Stanton from MLive. He wrote what I would call a very assertive letter on Friday, April 9th. And the concurrence letter was sent out on Monday morning. Also, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell was meeting with the governor on Monday morning, visiting vaccination clinics. So a number of things happened that I think just created this tipping point to get the letter sent. So that's really great. And then I've also been attending meetings with the attorneys, because the other part of the dual process is a hearing before Judge Connors in early May. And so there was a meeting today with the attorneys, along with representatives from the AG's office and Eagle, in preparation of that hearing. And hopefully that's not confidential who was actually in the meeting today, but that's just common sense that people are all working together to be better prepared for the hearing.
Great. Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, I guess I could mention 2 things. One is that we approved a consent agenda item to spend $100,000 on bike lane year-round maintenance. And the other is that we had the first reading for the site plan or rezoning, and I'm not sure if it's site plan approval or just rezoning, for Shannon can correct me, for the Valhalla development project, which would go in by well, it's across from my dentist's office. That's how I think of it. But it's proximate to the Michigan golf course.
Across from Pioneer.
Across from Pioneer, yep. Yeah. And that, as you probably know, will be an all-electric apartment and condo development. So I think that's of interest to Environmental Commission. And I think that's about it for that last meeting.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you both. So in terms of the chair report, I just had three things to say, and that is that today Governor Whitmer announced that state facilities are going to go to 100% renewable energy by 2025. They're collaborating with the Lansing Board of Water and Light, DTE, and consumers to make that happen. Yesterday, the House Budget Committee looked at the EGLA's budget, the subcommittee that's responsible for EGLA's budget, and they recommended reducing it by 25%, and then by revisiting it quarterly. And suppose the justification was that because of COVID, they're not sure how much money they'll have for EGLA. So the governors remarked on this. So anybody out there who's concerned about it, I have a video of the half-hour session that was recorded, of course, and I'm willing to share that with anybody so they can see what happened. It was rejected on a total party line vote. And the only key thing here is that Sri Thanadar, he's the vice chairman of that committee, and he proposed 4 amendments that would have improved the situation with EGLA in terms of actually freeing up money that is related more to bond proposals and federal money that's available that was rejected by the by a party line vote as well. So we'll see how this shapes up, but this is going to make it very difficult for EGLA to do any environmental cleanup for MI Green Waters, PFAS, and several other things. So this is very important. So we should watch this issue and weigh in with our state representatives on this. And the third thing is that I noticed that today there was it was published in MLive under Juliana Lumage's byline. Today in MLive, there was an article about the DTE and Ann Arbor's OSI department came to an agreement about the voluntary green pricing that DTE offers. So you can look for that MLive article. And again, it's under the byline of Juliana Lumage, Lumaj. It was published today online around noon. So those are the only things I wish to report at this time. So if there's no questions, we'll follow on to report from staff. So Josh?
Sure. Let's see, kind of following up on that, the energy thread, a few things that we're working on at the city. We have 1 megawatt of solar, so on-site solar, an RFP that went out. So I'm currently working on basically wrapping that up. We're in the selection process. And so we'll hopefully have a selected solar installer here shortly. On top of that, we also have 2 rounds. So we did 1 round already of energy audits on existing city buildings, most of those being parks and recs, so kind of smaller buildings with the eye not only towards kind of energy efficiency improvements we could do across those buildings, but also electrification. So looking at one of the sites that kind of stands out in my mind is the senior center. It has electric baseboard heating along with kind of a traditional natural gas furnace, and so a few kind of competing systems all in one building. And I think it's a prime location for a heat pump, air-to-air exchange heat pump, and a place that we're hoping, if we go ahead and put a heat pump in, we can also make it kind of almost like a pilot case for the community members to come and see what a heat pump's all about. So I think there's always that opportunity to get the community engaged, especially with equipment that they might not be as familiar with. So we're hoping to do all that. So I guess, just to keep it brief, those are some of the high level things we're working at on the city.
Josh, may I ask something real quick?
Sure.
There's going to be a workshop, I think is what it's being called,
Mm-hmm.
regarding heat pumps
Mm-hmm.
on May 12th
Mm-hmm.
at 7 p.m. Is that right?
Yes.
And Missy told me yesterday that 150 people have signed up for that.
That is correct. Yep.
So if you're interested or you know someone who's interested in learning more about heat pumps and how you might be able to consider that in your near-term or mid to long-term plans, I encourage you to sign up for that.
Yeah, we've gotten local contractors. So it was very hard early on to find contractors who specifically could install heat pumps. But I think as time has gone on, and I think the demand is really, especially with these kind of events, these community events, I think the demand is really building in the city, and so I think it's really helping to bring people out, contractors who normally not look necessarily at heat pumps that might be a little bit more complicated out of the realm of their expertise, have really come out in force, and so we're happy with that kind of those contractors meeting with our community members.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you, Josh.
Yeah, of course.
So the next item on the agenda are action items, and I have two. One is that the rain gardener information, we were talking about putting information on the city's rain garden website. We're updating that information. And the second one was is that Kathy and Rita are going to lead this group and lead a group and further develop the Chapter 40 discussion and come up with a proposal. Hopefully very soon they'll return to the full commission with this, with a concrete proposal that we can discuss. Are there any other action items I might have missed? No, I don't hear anything. So items for the next agenda. I think the Natural Features Working Group is going to manage the presentation. I want to thank Rita and her associates for the Pollinators Work Group manage the presentations and the agenda for this meeting. And I'm looking forward to the Natural Features Work Group doing a similar job for our May 25th meeting. So let's see, the next, are there any other items that people would like to propose for our next meeting? No, I don't hear anything. So the next item on the agenda is the next scheduled meeting, which I believe is May 25th. I better see. No, it is May 27th. May 27th, Thursday, the fourth Thursday is May 27th. So that's our next scheduled meeting. We'll see you all there. So we'll move on to the next public commentary. Public comment. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 1-877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099 and enter meeting ID 997-3412-6347. City staff will, this information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And be patient. There is a delay of up to 30 seconds before a connection is established. Josh, do we have anybody on the line yet?
I don't see anyone yet.
Okay. Okay. Well, I don't, is there anybody on the line now?
I think, yep, no one yet. So I think we're good.
Okay, then. I think we passed our 30 seconds here, so I call this meeting adjourned at 9:48. Thanks, everybody.